Hello again, folks, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about my thoughts on the European Union votes. Now, first of all, I am always happy when a greater degree of freedom is expressed by people in general, and this whenever things move a little bit towards sanity and autonomy and at least national sovereignty rather than big empires, that's great. That's great. First thing I wanted to say, and I didn't realize this till fairly recently, just how much of a nation or a uh, how it's considered to be a nation now, the European Union. I mean, one currency and so on. But what I mean by that is that other countries or empires, like a place like Canada, they look upon they look upon a place like, say, the Netherlands through the lens, if you will, of the European Union. In other words, when they deal with it, they deal with the European Union. For example, I know of somebody who wants to emigrate to another country from the Netherlands. And believe it or not, he has to go to, I think, Dusseldorf, Germany to get his birth certificate. I mean, it's just absolutely insane. When you think about it, Hitler won. If countries in Europe, in order to get their documentation, have got to go to Germany, that's like, it's like the United States, right? It's like when you need national stuff and you live in Oklahoma, you have to get it from Washington, D.C., right? Well, Germany, I guess, is the D.C. of those places. I mean, Hitler won. And there's a bit of controversy about this, but this is a little aside. I'll go on a ramble here as far as I don't know the whole story. But apparently the European Union, some people speculate it got part of its sort of inertia going by the Nazis. The Nazis actually held, I believe it was the first, something like the European Common Market or whatever. That was the predecessor. Correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm not detailed on this, but they had the first meetings, and it's like the meetings just kept going after the war, and the whole everything that was supposed to be that's there now, like common currency, like federal laws kind of thing, that was all proposed at the time. The idea of it predated the Nazis, but nevertheless, the Nazis carried that flag on, and it continues on. So those of you who think the European Union is such a great idea, remember that guy that you seem to hate so much, which he deserves to be hated, that guy Hitler, he liked it too. So just remember that. Okay, he wasn't a big fan of freedom, apparently. Now, another guy who I admire for his sort of prophecies in a way. This guy Dean Clifford, who's basically been depersoned off the internet, was imprisoned for many years and such like that. I don't know the whole story once again, but nevertheless, he had a lot of wise things to say, and most of his stuff is taken off the internet now. But anyway, he was saying, watch for the pendulum swing. And now coming back to that pendulum swing, I talked about that a few weeks ago, that pendulum swing, right? The high water mark was the LGBT stuff, and especially the guys going into women's washrooms and little girls' washrooms, especially. That was the high water mark. You're going to see a big swing take place, and we're seeing this rippling going across the world right now, one after the other. These mainstream oligarchical type politics of the center, the left, the center right, center left, they're just crumbling. Look at England. I mean, the conservative, or the Tories or whatever, not the Tories, but the Conservatives, they're basically washed out. Those are the Tories, I guess. I forget which is which. Anyways, Theresa May's party pretty much washed out in the European elections, which I don't really understand European elections either. But it's like the federal election in the States now, because the European Union is a grand country. It's an empire. It's Hitler's empire. Anyway, this guy Dean Clifford, he warned. He said, look, there's a push now. That was back in the free men of the land rather time, about 8 years ago, whatever, when people were talking a lot about that. And people were starting to learn about what the whole scam was, this whole scam of, Social Security and all that nonsense. He was saying, okay, right now they're calling us a bunch of idiots, terrorists. I was pulled over by the cops one time, and they asked me, because I asked like two questions. They asked me if I was a free man on the land. They had made up this trigger name, right? So they just thought we were crazy conspiracy theorists. But now you see the whole world is like this this conspiracy, there's like millions and millions and millions of conspiracy theories. In fact, they're the majority now. It's hilarious. But he said, you watch, when this takes place on a vast scale, when a lot of people get wind of the scam that's going on, what they're going to do is just vote in other politicians who appear to be in favor of them. So my warning to people is, look, okay, they got all these so-called freedom, sovereignty type people into Brussels. But the problem is they get into these cushy jobs and they start making deals and all of a sudden they're not so pro what you thought they were. I mean, look at the who was it? The Tea Party Republicans. You know, most of them went into Congress in the States and ended by voting in favor of Obama. I mean, that was not what they were put there for. So just watch for that, because there's always these opportunists who will jump into these things. They're going with the tide, and the tide is the pendulum, right? Things got so crazy. Men wanting to go into little girls' washrooms was kind of the high water mark, and people said enough. So what's their solution? Let's vote another bunch of people in. Let's put a bunch of people in who say the things that we like to hear. Mind you, the problem is they go there and they won't dissolve the European Union. But they should dissolve the European Union. They have enough strength now to go in there and say, okay, let's just dissolve this European Union. Get out of this nonsense. But they won't do that. But they should do it. And what they should do, if people had a brain on their head, they wouldn't stop at just dissolving the European Union. They'd then go and dissolve the United States. We'd go and dissolve Canada. We'd go and dissolve Australia into all the various different states. And they wouldn't stop there. Then the cities and towns would dissolve from the states. And then, eventually, you see, the citizens would separate and dissolve into men and women. Sovereign men and women under God. Because that's the only true reality. That's the true reality. People say, oh, this God stuff you talk about sometimes, Steve. What's that got to do with anything? That's not reality. No, it is reality. It's, if you think about it, none of us created us. And I'm not saying I got a narrative as to what God is. I'm not saying it's Jesus Christ or any of these thousands that the Hindus talk about or whatever. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that everything was created and we don't know the source of that power. We just know that there's powers which create us. And it seems to have a logic to it, right? So that's what we're subject to. That is the real law. The rest of this nonsense that people make up is just the fantasy, right? That's the descent into hell. The descent into hell is that we create something called a citizen. That's a figment of our imagination. A citizen, it's a legal entity. And then we say that that's what we are. So we're saying that we are what we've created. That's creating a false idol which we enter. And that's the descent into hell, because it's down, right? What's above us, figuratively, right? What's above us is superior to us, that which creates us. That we are subject to. From there, we are sovereign among the men and women in our community or whatever, so long as that we have our mental faculties in order. And what we create is what we create. It's supposed to serve us, not we serve it. But what we do is we enter it and then we play service to it. And that is the descent into hell. That is the true story, I believe, of the whole narrative of descending into hell. The ascent into heaven is to come back out of that all and be sovereign among men, but be subject to God. That is, that's more the ascent, because we're going back up, right? We're going back up the chain of command. We're going back up to what creates us, and living in reverence to that. So, but somehow I don't think this will be talked about in the European Parliament, unfortunately, or any parliament, because all that, so it's considered crazy talk, of course, because it's sensible, it's rational, and sensibility and rationality is really not permitted in public, polite discourse. It's all a bunch of fantasies and lies and nonsense. And, however, coming back to it all, I'm glad to see lesser tyrants going into the halls of Parliament. That's always a good thing, because at least it buys us some time. It allows the discussion. Maybe it'll stave off the trampling of the freedom of trampling upon the freedom of speech, which is so important. As we mentioned before, E. Michael John used the term unprotected intercourse. That's what we need. Unprotected verbal intercourse. We need to have that. We absolutely have to have it. If it's protected, you can't say this, you can't say that. You got to put a condom on this one because it's hate speech and so on. That is not freedom, and that is the beginning of the tyranny that comes as we descend into the hell of our own making. The ascent into heaven is to come back out and to declare sovereignty under God, I would say. My comments on it. And to cherish the moment. A friend of mine sold me this shirt. It's a great shirt. I've had it for a couple of years. Cherish the moment. It's all we really have to experience is the moment. But that's an aside. Just in case you're wondering what this cherish the is. Cherish the moment. Steve here again. Great chatting. And if you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe, and share. And whatever you do, always aim for freedom. Always aim for unprotected verbal intercourse. Promote it, and as much as you can, because it's the foundation of what we have. And just think of it in that terms is the way I like to think of it. As we descend into what we create, it's kind of a mess. Ascend to where we belong, which is men and women. We don't need any other labels, I would say. Anyways, I know I'm not supposed to conclude anything like that. I already concluded and I started again, so I'll say goodbye for now and talk again soon. Bye for now.